So to open up this particular panel, I'm now going to call on our distinguished partner and supporter, Pierre Gosselin, who's the Vice President for Private Sector Infrastructure and Industrialization from the African Development Bank, as well as Shamir Gray Johnson, who's the Head of Regional Integration, Infrastructure and Trade at NEPAD, to make some opening remarks. And I'd like to call on Shamir first. Thank you. Can you just share with us the 5% agenda and what the process is? And
yeah, I was actually going to give a short presentation, but before I do that, thank you, Hubert. Thank you for having me. I thought maybe I'll just give a quick background as to why we came up with the 5% agenda, so that the participants and colleagues will appreciate the seriousness of why we need a 5% agenda. Just backtracking 5 years ago, when the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, PIDA, was endorsed by the heads of state, there was this euphoria and excitement that the next day we will have so much private money accompanying public money, and the 433 projects will be implemented by 2020. We are now in 2017. We have 3 years to go, or less than 3 years, and not many PIDA projects have been implemented, and we have not been able to attract private financing to get these projects implemented. So 2 years after 2012, we went to Dakar. We had the Dakar Financing Summit, and then we found out that money wasn't the problem. It was really poorly prepared projects. So from 2014 to present, we've really doubled or redoubled our efforts to make sure that these projects are well conceptualized, that there's project preparation funds for it, and we are beginning to package projects which should attract private capital. But then last year, based on the work we did with Africa Investor, the African Development Bank, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and of course the African Union, the work we did on de-risking projects, we found out that there is need for institutional investors and institutional players like pension funds and sovereign wealth funds to also participate in the implementation of transboundary infrastructure projects. So out of that process, we came up with the 5% agenda. And the agenda, it's very, very clear. It's an agenda that we were very serious about. It was launched by the new chairperson of the African Union, so we've pitched it at the highest political level. And the idea is to make sure that the communique that was finalized last month here in New York, no, we in Washington actually, not in New York, during the United Nations General Assembly, that communique, that business communique that brought together a number of pension funds, a number of public players to agree that we needed to do something about getting institutional investors put money into Africa's public transboundary infrastructure, so to speak. So these are the timelines. We are hoping that by the time we get to January 2018, the consultation today being one of them, and the advocacy and also reaching out to select heads of state and reaching out to select finance ministers, which we are doing, we will be able to announce that at least 10 to 12 African countries are ready to commit to this 5% agenda. And I'll just give quick highlights of what this agenda is all about. As I mentioned before, we've tried to fit in the agenda into the work that we're doing as a continental body, of course, together with the African Development Bank. So the agenda fits squarely into moving projects from the preparation to, from the quick and diagnostics and with the SDM to the preparation to the Continental Business Network, and all the way to even considering getting pension funds and diaspora bonds issued. So we are using what we call the Continental Business Network, which is a platform that brings together both public, high-level public decision makers and private sector players like CEOs and chief executives that are involved in construction, in project development, and so forth, and also the MDBs and the DFIs to really look at the project and move it forward. So the 5% agenda really complements the work that NEPAD's doing. But just to highlight some key sections of the communique. It's a 15-point communique, and of course all 15 points are very relevant and very important, but it will be important for us to just note point number 7, 5, and 6. Point number 7, which really underscores that we need to be very serious and be committed to making sure that on average, the 1.5% investments in assets under management should be increased to 5%. In the next 5 years. Of course, different countries, 54 countries in Africa, different countries have different legislations and different regulations to allow for pension funds to invest. So we understand that. But the idea is to get the coalition of the willing, the 10 or 12 countries, through their finance ministers, through their heads of state to commit to this. And we can start monitoring and really working with them to get to that 5% in the next 5 years. And point number 5 also talks about that this agenda will reduce and make an impact on the huge figures that we are all aware of in terms of the infrastructure gap in Africa. And point number 6 really talks about the need for reform, the need for regulatory reform, the need for institutions to be allowed to invest in this agenda. I mean pension funds. And then just to sum it up, if you look at the last point here, that the initiative offers benefits to all stakeholders. So we pitched it at a win-win kind of arrangement, where heads of state that have a mandate in most African countries to deliver to their citizens will be able to see how best regulation can be changed to allow their pension funds to start looking at transboundary infrastructure. So of course we take on board all the other issues, making sure that there's affordability and reliable infrastructure and there's budgetary discipline. So it's just not done in a euphoric moment, but it's done with precision, it's done with making sure that the budget officers who control budgets and make sure that investments are done properly at the finance ministries take the necessary steps to make sure there is a responsible agenda, committed agenda that the heads of state can really push towards. So I will stop there for now, and I think as the discussions go, as we progress, I will share maybe in the concluding remarks what are the next concrete steps, like very concrete, that we hope to achieve in the next 3 months, and how quickly we can get the ministers of finance in their meeting in March to at least put their hand up and say, country X, Y, and Z are ready to go through this 5% agenda in the next 5 years. Thank you very much, Hubert.
Thank you for those opening remarks, Shamir. And again, as Kwame Nkrumah once said, seek ye first the political kingdom. So, we applaud your work, and we know that, at the top and at that level, it's complicated, but I think you've definitely put some very solid foundations in place.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.